Most home gardeners lose between 40 and 60% of their potential harvest every single season. Not because of pests, not because of bad weather, not because they chose the wrong variety. They lose it before a single seed goes in the ground. And the reason most people never realize this is because soil looks ready when it isn't. The snow melts, the surface dries, you dig a hole and it crumbles. It feels workable, it feels alive. But what you're seeing is texture. What determines your harvest is biology, and after winter, biology is suppressed, dormant, fragmented, structurally compromised. Even if your garden performed well last year, if you plant into soil that has not been biologically reactivated, your crops do not fail. They simply underperform. And underperformance is far more dangerous than failure because you don't see it happening. You just accept smaller harvests as normal. That disappointing August tomato cluster, that wasn't decided in August. It was decided in March. March is the only window where you can reset the biological engine under your garden before growth demands begin. Miss it, and you spend the rest of the season compensating. Get it right, and the difference compounds. Stronger early root systems, better nutrient cycling, heavier fruit set, longer production windows. This is not about adding fertilizer. It's about removing the invisible ceiling that caps your yield every year. To understand why the reset works, you have to understand what winter actually does to soil. Most gardeners assume soil simply pauses during winter and resumes where it left off in spring. That's not what happens. Winter moisture freezes and thaws repeatedly. That part can improve structure by breaking apart compacted layers and creating air pockets. But while physical structure may benefit, the biological system takes a hit. Microbial populations crash during extended cold. Fungal networks that once connected plant roots to distant nutrient sources go dormant or die back. Organic matter decomposition slows to near zero metabolic activity. Nutrients that were actively being converted into plant-available forms become locked in place because the organisms responsible for unlocking them are offline. By early March, what you have is soil with decent bones and very low energy. The house still stands, but the power grid is down. If you plant into that soil without reactivating it, your seedlings enter an environment where nutrient cycling is sluggish, root colonization is delayed, and moisture regulation is inconsistent. They survive, they grow, but they never fully accelerate. And that slow start permanently alters root architecture. Plants establish their root systems in the first few weeks after germination or transplanting. If those weeks occur in biologically sluggish soil, root systems remain shallow and less branched. And shallow root systems limit everything that follows: nutrient uptake, drought resilience, flower production, fruit load. You cannot retrofit root depth in June. Root architecture is written during establishment. That's why March matters more than May. The soil reset is built on 3 actions performed in sequence, each correcting a specific post-winter deficit. The order matters because each step enables the next. Step 1 is structural assessment and correction. Before adding anything, you need to understand what winter left behind. Walk your beds and push a digging fork into several areas. You are testing compaction depth and moisture distribution. If the fork sinks easily 8 to 10 inches, structure is good. If it meets resistance at 4 to 6 inches, you have a compaction layer restricting future root growth. Use the fork to gently lever and loosen the soil without flipping or inverting it. This distinction matters. Inverting soil buries the biologically active top layer and exposes dormant subsoil, effectively resetting the system backward. Loosening preserves existing microbial communities while reopening oxygen pathways for roots and organisms alike. While loosening, grab a handful from 4 to 6 inches deep and perform the squeeze test. If it forms a tight ball that doesn't crumble, it's too wet. Wait. Working saturated soil destroys structure and creates hard clods that persist all season. If it crumbles cleanly, it's workable. Most March soil sits right at that threshold. Damp, but ready. Structural damage done now cannot be corrected once crops are planted. This is your only clean window. Step 2 is biological reactivation, and this is where doubling your harvest actually begins. The fastest and most reliable way to restart soil biology is the application of 2 to 3 inches of fully finished compost across the entire bed. Hide integrated lightly into the top 4 to 6 inches, not scattered on top. Not left as decoration, integrated where biological activity concentrates. Finished compost is not simply nutrients. It is a living inoculant. Each handful contains billions of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and microscopic life forms ready to colonize dormant soil. When you integrate compost in March, you are not waiting for native microbial populations to slowly recover over 6 weeks. You are injecting active biology into a warming environment. As soil temperatures rise through the 40s and into the 50s, those organisms multiply rapidly. They begin decomposing residual organic matter. They unlock nutrients tied up in soil particles. They rebuild fungal networks. Within days, the system begins humming again. Without this step, a native biology eventually recovers, but often not until late April or May. That delay forces your earliest plantings to establish in biologically sluggish soil during their most critical growth phase. With the compost reset, early roots encounter active nutrient cycling immediately. That head start compounds all summer. Stronger early roots mean stronger stems. Stronger stems mean more flowers. More flowers mean more fruit. This is not theoretical, it is biological sequencing. And sequencing is what separates average harvests from doubled ones. The third step in the March soil reset is the one most gardeners skip, and it's the one that determines whether everything you just did actually compounds. After loosening structure and integrating compost, most people plant immediately or leave the soil exposed while they wait for planting day. Both are mistakes. Bare soil in March is unstable soil. Wind strips moisture from the surface. Cold nights followed by warm afternoons create temperature swings that stress the upper biological layer you just worked to reactivate. Heavy spring rains hit exposed soil directly, collapsing pore space and sealing the surface you just reopened. And perhaps most importantly, bare soil is an invitation to weeds that are germinating at the same soil temperatures your crops need. The fix is not heavy insulation, it's surface regulation. Apply 1 to 2 inches of light organic mulch, shredded leaves, partially decomposed straw, or fine compost, across the bed immediately after amendment. Not thick enough to slow warming, just enough to stabilize moisture and buffer temperature swings. That thin layer protects oxygen channels, prevents crusting, and creates a humid microclimate at the soil surface. And that microclimate is where fungal networks rebuild. Fungi are the slowest biological system to recover after winter, and they are also the most powerful. Fungal threads extend far beyond root zones, transporting nutrients and water across distances roots alone cannot reach. When fungal recovery is delayed, plants rely almost entirely on their own limited root systems. When fungal recovery accelerates, effective root reach expands dramatically. This is where harvest multiplication becomes realistic. A plant supported by active fungal networks accesses more nutrients, stabilizes water intake more efficiently, and withstands stress more effectively. That support translates into heavier flowering and sustained fruit production, rather than early peaks followed by mid-summer decline. Surface mulch in March accelerates fungal reestablishment by maintaining the consistent moisture conditions fungi require. Skip this step, and fungal recovery lags weeks behind bacterial activation. Include it, and the soil system regains balance far earlier in the season. Now let's address timing, because timing is what turns this from good gardening advice into a yield multiplier. March is not arbitrary. In most zones, soil temperatures hover between 40 and 50 degrees during this window. That range is warm enough for microbial activity to begin accelerating, but cool enough that most major planting has not yet begun. It is a buffer period, a preparation phase. If you wait until April to perform this reset, you collide with your planting schedule. Cool season crops should already be in the ground. Warm season transplants are approaching their date. There is no gap between amendment and demand. Biology does not have time to stabilize before roots arrive. March gives you 2 to 4 weeks of uninterrupted biological acceleration before heavy nutrient demand begins. That head start is the difference between planting into a living system and planting into one that is still warming up. And that difference is exactly where most gardens lose 40% of their yield potential without ever realizing it. Here's what that loss looks like in practice. You plant tomatoes into soil that hasn't been reset. They grow, they look fine, but root systems remain shallower than they could be. Flowering begins slightly weaker. Fruit set starts slightly lower. By July heat, those shallower roots struggle with moisture fluctuations. Leaves curl. A blossom drop increases. You respond by watering more and adding fertilizer. The plants survive, but output plateaus. Meanwhile, a garden that completed the March reset shows a different pattern. Strong early root establishment supports consistent nutrient uptake. Flowering is heavier. Fruit clusters are fuller. Heat stress has less impact because roots are deeper, and fungal networks extend reach. One garden produces modestly and declines, the other accelerates and sustains. The only visible difference by midsummer is output. The invisible difference was March. This is why the claim of doubling harvest isn't exaggeration. It's compounding. A 20% increase in early root development becomes a 20% increase in nutrient uptake capacity. That increased capacity supports a higher flower count. Higher flower count supports increased fruit load. Increased fruit load produces measurable harvest weight. Small early advantages stack, but small early disadvantages stack too. Most gardeners unknowingly accept the disadvantage because soil looked ready. Texture fooled them. Biology determines outcome. There's another long-term layer that matters even more than this season. The March reset is not a one-time intervention. It is an annual compounding practice. Year 1, you are rebuilding biological momentum that winter slowed. Year 2, you are reactivating a system that already contains higher organic matter and stronger microbial diversity. Year 3 and beyond, the reset becomes easier and more powerful because soil structure improves annually rather than degrading. Organic matter accumulates. Moisture retention stabilizes. Nutrient cycling becomes more efficient. After several seasons of consistent resets, gardeners notice something striking. Plants establish faster, require less supplemental fertilizer, and maintain production longer into late summer. That is not luck. It is accumulated biological capital. If your garden has been requiring more fertilizer every year to produce the same results, that is a signal that biology is declining. If yields seem to plateau despite good weather and healthy plants, that is a signal that root systems are constrained. If summer decline feels inevitable by August, that is often a signal that March preparation was incomplete. The reset addresses the system underneath the symptoms. It strengthens structure, fuels microbial populations, accelerates fungal recovery, stabilizes moisture, and creates a foundation that supports sustained output rather than short bursts of growth. So the full March workflow looks like this. As soon as soil is workable, loosen without inversion to restore oxygen pathways. Apply 2 to 3 inches of fully finished compost and integrate into the upper soil profile to inoculate and fuel biological recovery. Water deeply to activate microbial processes. Apply a light surface mulch layer to regulate moisture and protect structure while fungi reestablish. Then wait. Let the system wake up before you demand production from it. Plant into soil that is already active rather than hoping it activates around your crops. Most people begin spring by buying seedlings. The highest leverage gardeners begin by restoring soil, because the harvest you measure in August is rarely determined in July. It is determined in March. Structure sets root depth. Biology sets nutrient flow. Moisture stability sets resilience. Get those aligned before planting and the ceiling lifts. Skip them and the ceiling remains invisible but fixed. Doubling your harvest does not require exotic amendments, expensive inputs, or complex techniques. It requires correcting the quiet bottlenecks that limit growth before the season begins. And those bottlenecks almost always sit beneath the surface, waiting for a gardener who understands that soil is not dirt. It is a living system that needs to be restarted each spring before it can support abundance. March is the reset. The harvest is the result.